good to be here. On this regenerative ag, I tell you, the closest thing to a miracle, I'd say it is a miracle that I've ever seen, is through regenerative management. It's just amazing what we can do, and we're just touching the tip of the iceberg. What we're doing now. All the speakers previously have done a great job, and I'm going to cover similar type things. So we're all coming at it a little different perspective. And adaptive grazing, well, I think we all agree on varying the management and disturbance and the recovery. All these tools are wonderful. So I'm talking about multi-species grazing and land management, and we'll divide them up a little bit, but they'll kind of go together. The picture you see there on the left is back probably in the late 70s when my dad was managing the place, and we had about 300 cows, and we were cutting hay back then. Now I buy all the hay in that I feed. I try to it varies a lot year to year. We've turned into a finishing operation now, cow-calf through finish, and we've got lots of diversity in livestock as well as vegetation. And I'll get into those numbers a little bit later. This is just show a few pictures just to show you or get you oriented where I'm coming from. This was a crop field, and we put it in annuals, summer annuals here, and it was a diverse mix. And then we went to cool season annuals, back to warm season annuals, then to perennials. Annuals come first in nature, so it's just a biomimicry of nature whenever you go to annuals first. I do put in some seeds, some annuals every year. Usually not more than 10% of the land goes in annuals. And part of that thought process is that I could do without 10% if I had a failure, but I couldn't do without more. And it's going to go on the land with the least cover, where some cover needs to be improved. Just a picture of some sheep when they were separate. In general, we like to run a flirt, run them all together, but we will separate them, as I think Alan pointed out. There's reason and timing and selective target grazing, that kind of thing, that can be done to divide them up. I work with a lot of producers on different farms. I was on one the other day. This guy doing a great job, conventional manager, but he had 10 herds, 10 different herds. Just think how we could simplify his life just going to 5 herds. I don't want him to have 5 herds, but 3 herds. His life is going to change immensely. So that was the big takeaway on that particular place. There's the flirt and just showing some of the temporary fencing. In that case, we had a 3-wire fence up. Now we pretty much run 2-wire, polywire. The whole farm's pretty much high tensile for the permanent fence, high tensile electric. I like for the perimeter, and I don't even have any of it, but the newest and greatest fence for the perimeter fence is the high tensile woven, the fixed knot fence. Look at that, and look at the 12-inch mesh if you're doing multi-species. Just showing that I had to take that picture real quick because my animals like sunflowers real well, but that's just a part of the warm season mix. There was buckwheat and sunflowers and cowpeas and soybeans and pearl millet and Sudan grass and other things, crabgrass, annual aspidisa in that mix there. This is interesting. This is a zucchini. I found that my animals don't like zucchini. So you can raise zucchini. Just throw it in the mix. You can raise zucchini out in the pastures and still harvest them. The reason we added it in there is because it's a cucurbit. It's coming from a different family than the grasses and legumes and forbs. It would be a forb, but it's a little different take on the diversity. That's some soil. That was a picture taken at one of my pasture walks, and got a pasture walk coming up October 14th on my place, and you're welcome to come to that. And it's in South Central Kentucky. I have more on that at the end. But it's all about the soil, as has been mentioned several times. And my take on soil health is it's real simple. If we don't provide the carbon, the soil life is going to eat the carbon coatings on those aggregates. There's carbon coatings on those aggregates. They eat that carbon coating, the soil is going to collapse, and you're going to lose internal drainage. So provide a carbon source all the time. That's root exudates, and it's also residue. All right, so here's the current numbers. It's very, very dynamic. I've had 300 nanny goats. I've had 300 ewes. Now we're bigger on cattle. We only have 80 ewes, have about 40 lambs we've kept. There's a big market for breeding stock in sheep and hair sheep. That's kind of our target with Katahdins. Have 50 cow calf, 50 cows. And then we have brought in stockers. We have about 30 finishing cattle right now, 50 stockers, 18 goats. I brought the goats back. I went out of goats. Now they're coming back because the briars are increasing. Match the animals to the vegetation you have. We raise about 50 hogs a year, and they're on 2-wire electric, sometimes 1-wire electric. This may be a little out of date. Now I'm at 1.3 acres per animal unit. That's way too high. That's too high. What impacts the carrying capacity is up in the yield. And Russ was telling me he's improved his yield. I think the way I got it, he was making about 5 tons per acre yield. Most of the land around here is making 2 to 3, 3.5. Some land will be 4 acres. If you were harvesting it, cutting it off. That's one of the big things. And the other is the utilization. And the more often you rotate, even if you're leaving a lot behind, you've got high utilization of what they did intake. So, how did the farm, what was the evolution of the farm? It was cattle. We had a lot of single wire, high tensile wire. For cross fencing, and we just left it up and started adding wires to it. Now most all the fence is 5-strand. It depends on pressure. The degree of fence you need depends on how good your grass is. My dad had a saying, the best fence is good grass. He also had a saying, don't make the perimeter fence too strong, they can't get back in. And we've had animals come to our place because we had good grass. So he did a good job. He stayed a little too long and grazed a little too low, which is so common with so many farms. And that grazing low impacts your yield big time. Russ showed those slides on the impact on roots and all. But it's as much as you can produce 2/3 more by raising that height. If you're down there at that 1-inch level, you're going to increase. All you're doing is raising the floor. Give up that little bit, that 2 inches. Get it to 3 or 4, and we'd love for it to be at 6 or even higher, the residuals when you move off. Most of us are moving off at a stage when most people would be moving in. So really protect that residual height and residue. There's been some questions on weeds, and the big thing is we need residue and we need that residual height. That perilla mint, somebody asked about perilla mint, and it's a problem on my place, as long as also the microstegium or nimblewheel is a problem. The perilla mint comes up in late April, early March. I can dig down in the grass and see it. And like I think Greg Judy was saying, is the cockerel comes up later. But if we have a canopy over it, and light is such a big factor. If it's not getting light, we're shading it out. So keep that residual height above it. If you graze it low, that weed's waiting. It's fixing to release. So remember your goal. If your goal is to control Parrella mint, and I had it over my whole farm, keep a higher residual height at the time of year it's coming up, and that will help that. Pigweed, keep more residue, keep the soil cooler, keep a little more cover. If you've got pigweed, you can be proud you have high fertility ground, right? But we don't want spiny amaranth. So more residue, higher heights. If you have to plant something, get something out there so that the pigweed doesn't have a chance. I've got a number of things on that slide. I don't know how many I want to cover. One thing is the hub. When I look at property, I look for the hub. If it was this room, the hub is where all the fields come together. I'm standing in the hub because all these different rows of tables and all, they kind of lead to here. So this would be the corral. It's a key location, so be thinking about where that might be. But that's the place to start. If you're adding small ruminants, start with that hub and reinforce the fencing so you can manage small ruminants and then grow from there. So here's an overview. What I plan to cover is have a goal in mind where you're headed. And then what proportion of livestock, we're going to cover that. Should we do leader follower or should we do a flirt, whatever. And then the weed control I already touched on. Introducing new species of livestock as well as new species of plants. Internal parasite management. Small ruminants are so prone to internal parasites. Goat's the wimpiest animal out there. So be aware of that. They got a name for eating tin cans or anything that's out there, but they're a problematic animal if you don't have good management. Cull for feet problems, parasites. It's more important with small ruminants than it is with cattle, and it's important with cattle too. Working facilities, they don't have to be real complicated. Remember who's selling something is advertising more, and they're more in the press, and that's always at you to buy more stuff. You don't need big inventory to work small ruminants. The predator control we'll talk about, and we'll go from there. This is an older picture now, but it's an example of my goal for my place, and it's based on holistic management. A healthy, low-stress, low-cost grazing operation that is productive, improves the environment and life, in general, all life, and being consistently profitable. And then my mission, which is to inspire others to improve the world, and improve the world through regenerative ag. So as you get older, you begin to think about those things. What am I really trying to do here? So why add the multi-species? Of course, we can increase the amount of meat production. We can increase it by about 24%. There's some research out there that shows that you can do that. When you add cattle to a sheep operation, you only increase meat production by about 9%. I believe it's Idaho State that did that work. The weed control, of course, we know they eat different things. And then also sheep don't avoid where the manure pile is of the cattle. They don't avoid their own manure pile. You wish they would sometimes because they're more prone to coccidiosis when they don't. The hay saving. Sheep they won't eat hay if you have something to graze out there, and that becomes a grazing management issue. If you just manage like you've managed cattle all your life, you're going to overgraze because the sheep are going to take it lower. So you've got to consider, when should I lock those sheep down or move them to a field that's higher height, maybe separate them. They serve as vacuums for each other's parasites. In other words, the cattle and sheep don't share significant parasites, so they clean those up. They're a dead-end host for those parasites. The breeding age of small ruminants can be as little as 10 months. What else? Short gestation, 3 months. no, sorry, 5 months gestation period. I was thinking about the hogs, 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days. And then the yearling lambs are equal to mother's weight, just in a year. And in a cattle, there's no way. We're looking at 50% of mother's weight as a weaning weight. Yearling weight still wouldn't come close to matching the mother's weight. Of course, increased income. And we can, I don't think I have it on here, but you can increase stocking rate about 20% if you add sheep or goats to a cattle operation, if you don't go too high numbers on the sheep and goats. Here's the thing, is you might start off with 1 ewe per cow, and that's where I recommend you stop right there, as far as if you're not wanting to impact the cattle grazing. But they're going to do so well, you're going to say, I got to have more of these. These are fat as pigs. I had a guy come to my place one time, and his daughter said, look, Daddy, there's some pigs down there, and it was my sheep. And it was like, wow, I'm there, I've arrived. But they looked so good, I had to have more. I kept adding. Disorders started showing up, and they weren't as fat. That's just how it works. So yeah, what species should we stock? If you've got briars and multiflora rows, you need goats. Realize they have a lot of personality. The saying, if you throw water through a fence, you can't keep a goat in. Well, I kind of like the idea of if a few goats get out, get that group up and sell them, because they're bad influence. You don't want your other animals running with that type of goat. And then sheep, forbs, they love buttercup, the yellow flowered plant. The goats love ironweed, which cattle don't eat hardly at all. Sheep eat it pretty good. Horse nettle. Goats, the sheep maybe eat it better than the goats. I think they do, even though it's got spines on it. Yeah, so they'll all eat whatever's out there, but this is their preferences to go more this route. That's a picture of poison hemlock. When it first came in this part of the world, I thought it was going to kill a lot of livestock. It's not that bad for livestock, as long as they have other choice, something else to eat along with it. So, and I see cattle eat it with high density. With high density grazing, you almost don't need the sheep and the goats for weed control, because they're going to consume a lot more with the high density. And I consider high density grazing, anything above, I'm going to get in trouble for this one, but probably about 20,000 pounds per acre is you're going to get a lot of consumption of all these weeds. Of course, we already talked about the woody plants for the goats. And cattle they don't mind treading off in deep vegetation. Sheep and goats are prey animals. They don't like to go in. They'll edge it. They'll work around the edge, grazing or browsing prior to going into terminal. When you run them together, the cattle make trails, and the sheep and goats can go in there and access more of it. Sometimes I'll strip mow. This is when I had a high number of sheep and goats. I would strip mow that tall growth so that they could edge it. Talking about internal parasites, the cycle of the Haemonchus contortus, that's the barber pole worm, that's the one that causes anemia in sheep and goats, is the big killer. It's only 14 days, but remember, they're being hatched all the time, and it's like hibernating. Anyway, they won't come up till conditions are right, so they're always out there. Any rotation is better than no rotation as far as breaking the worm cycles, but try to extend it. I like a 45-day or longer rest period or recovery period for vegetation, and graze above 5 inches, because most of the parasites are in the bottom 5 inches. With cattle, the cycle of their parasites is about 21 days, so we're getting at least twice that cycle length by doing that. So I put this slide together. It's just a basic curve of cool season grass is the green curve, and then the red is with birthing about the end of March. And it's matching the breeding with the last trimester, high nutritional need, matching up with cool season grass. And you can see that it kind of works with the whole growth curve. Well, I think I have another slide on this. Well, let me go ahead and cover it. Hypothermia is worse with goats than it is with sheep, and so birthing time is a huge factor. You don't want them in January, February. It's best not having them, especially goats. Now, I've seen sheep lay down in the snow, and they get up the next morning and start grazing where they were laying down, because there's grass still there. I had never seen cattle do that. We don't get that much snow, so I'm not the one to look at for that. But so that's matching that up. Yeah, introducing new species, and this has a two-edged thing here, is also introducing them to electric wire. If you're bringing in new animals, or they broke to hot wire, or they hadn't quite figured out the land yet, where they're located. So it's nice to lock them down in a corral with a hot wire, offset hot wire, and that breaks them to the electric. It gets them homed in. They calm down from the trailer ride, and then graze them beside the other herd initially, and then turn them out. And if you're introducing new stock to the cow herd and they've never had sheep out there or goats out there or llamas or donkeys or whatever, run them about 3 days or longer. Just let them get used to each other. The guard dogs are the hardest thing to get used to the cattle, because they'll be barking and running up and down the fence, and the cattle are snorting and all too. So I'll do that for 3-5 days, maybe a week, just depending, and then turn them out into a bigger field so they have room to get away from each other. That's just a picture of my corral. I really like this layout. It's got a circle alley all the way around it. Every corral I build now is like this, an alley all the way around, and then it goes to the head working facility, and it goes into 3 pens where you can sort back into that alley. It can hold a lot of stock. Our sheep corral's similar to this. Like I say, everything we build is about like this now. And this is the Canadian sorting location. 2 alleys right next to each other. And if you haven't seen it on YouTube, then you just search Canadian sorting video, and it'll come up on YouTube. But I stand right here, and the animals are coming down through here. The cow's not very afraid of me, so she'll come through here. We got a high board right here where the calves or sheep can go under that. By the way, on the sheep and the goats, they segregate naturally. So if you give them 5 to 10 minutes, they're going to just be in their own group, and you just turn them out in a different area. So just give them a minute, let them work it out, and sheep are so flock-oriented, they'll come together. All right, so that's more of my preference on a sheep corral, because of that flock orientation, is to work them. Want them to see other sheep in front of them. They're drawn to them, so they want to come on through there. But I like the sorting real well. That's an offset wire there, offset electric on a barbed wire. It depends on your spacing on your barbed wire, but if you've got barbed wire out there now, you might get by with just 2 hot wires. The main hot wire is 8 inches off the ground, and it'll control most of them. But yeah, that's enough on that. That's just an old picture of when I first added goats, and the cattle, we just had single wire cross fencing at that time, and so the goats could go everywhere. Now that was a dry time, so it's maybe not the best picture, but you can see how clean it is where the goats have selectively sought out those briars. The forward grazing, this is more complicated than it first sounds. You know, what's the most needy animal? The one that's lactating, maybe if she's breeding, last trimester, but the dry animal's not so needy. Here's the quandary. If you don't watch it, you're going to run off and leave one of these herds. You're not forward grazing anymore because you've just got two herds. So if there's a rule of thumb is not to graze longer than 4 days on a field, and that's because they're going to start regrazing the same plant because you got regrowth. I agree with Russ, there's some regrowth faster than that, and it's better to have a back fence and all that, but so in other words, what I'm trying to get at is if one group moves, the other group needs to move, so that means you need to move every group or move them both at least every 2 days. And if one group needs moving, both groups need moving. Like I say, you're going to just move, you're going to run off and leave one of the herds if you don't watch it. You can do it with different wires. Like sometimes I'll run a wire about 42 inches, that'd be about right here, holds the cows back, the calves can creep graze, and then can run a wire at pigtail post height about 34 inches that holds the calves back. The sheep and goats can go further, and then you could have multi-wires, 2 wires or 3 wires to hold the sheep and goats back if you wanted. Now you could feed some special hay, like Sericia hay's got the best name for natural deworming, or you could feed alfalfa. Goats have the highest nutritional need, then sheep, then cattle. However, the goat can select the highest nutrition, sheep second, then cattle. But these little feeders, if you run cattle next to them, the cattle are just going to knock them over. That could kill sheep and goats. So again, just run a 34-inch high wire and the sheep and goats can get to that kind of feeder. That's just a water trough. If you're running deep water troughs like these tire tanks, you need blocks, concrete blocks in there if the water tank is over, say, 16 inches deep, so they can escape. They'll drown in there. Keep the water level high so they're not leaning over too far and falling in. These are some plants that have high tannins or terpenes. They're natural deworming plants. Some of them you wouldn't want to plant, but if they're available, then use them. So these are all medicinal type plants. Like Alan was saying earlier, they can help you with the deworming aspects. Just showing the quality. How many people have sheep here? All right, several. Yeah, goats. Oh no, I'm going to offend somebody. And then, the saying is to appreciate sheep, you need to have goats first. Cattle, how many have cattle? A lot, yep. All right. Llamas, alpacas. All right, you do? They're prone to that meningeal worm. Have you had any issues with that? The brain worm? Yeah, what's that? No. Yeah, meningeal worm is a brain worm. We've had it when you got wet conditions. It's carried by deer, and then it goes into snails, and then the animals accidentally, I guess, consume the snail, and they get this disorder. They're walking crooked, or their hind legs fall out behind them. Alpacas and llamas are real prone to that. If you ever see it, you need to treat them with a real high dose of ivermectin and Safeguard because they will die. So here's multiflora rose. On these, the NDF, we want low numbers. The lower the number, the better it is. So look at briars, real good NDF here. Proteins, those are all good proteins. Anytime we're above, 12% protein, we're high. You can see we got a bad calcium phosphorus ratio with briars, so we best have a good mineral out there. We normally want twice as much calcium as we do phosphorus. However, if you're in a low phosphorus area, and I'm like Alan, I think that these weeds are doing something for us. Like in this case, I feel like they're pulling up some phosphorus for the other plants. And it's kind of small, but just showing how these weeds compare with alfalfa. Red root pigweed out the roof in protein. In fact, it's so high in protein it can be a nitrate problem. But worked with a dairy producer one time, and he couldn't stand the pigweed, and we tested it, sent it off to a lab and all, but he'd mowed it down before. But he also looked at his milk numbers after, and they'd gone real spiked up, and he'd mowed that afternoon and didn't see the numbers. So they're if they eat them, they're forbs, and they are doing something for you. There are some low oxygen plants, which is compaction usually instead of wetness. It'd be curly dock. Has a root as long as my arm. And it's a big taproot. If you like what the radish does, then you should like this curly dock. And then most of the animals love it too. And it's good quality. I don't know if I have it on this list here. The plantains, they're another one that kind of a sign of compaction. Low oxygen is the way I look at it. Of course, the smartweed would be one. And it's on here. It's not a great on the digestibility, but pretty good on the ADF. Pretty good protein. More vegetative something is, the higher quality it is. That's more important than what the plant is. And that's what this slide here is showing. There's the curly dock, 30% protein when it's vegetative. That's out the roof. There's buttercup, where the sheep have selected it over white clover. Sheep like white clover real well. Goats don't hardly eat white clover. Amaranth, that's where they've stripped the leaves off. Again, real high protein. There's a common ragweed. Cattle don't like it so well. Sheep, it's like alfalfa. It's equal to alfalfa as far as the numbers. Cockaburr, I'm like Greg, we don't want it. We really don't want it because we have wool sheep. That's a bad combination. Another thing we found is that you don't want to run hair sheep with wool sheep, because the hair of the hair sheep gets on the wool and contaminates it. Not easy to get off. Sometimes we run coats on them. Sometimes we do a little more mowing to keep it in a vegetative state for the wool sheep. Yeah, so that cockaburr, let me say a little more about it. It's got 2 seed in a pod. One's a hard seed, one's a soft seed, and they germinate different times. So it's got toxicity, but I don't worry about toxicity. The biggest problem, the biggest weeds are the ones with the leaf that shade your good, desirable grass. And just like Greg talked about, let's get some vegetation above it. If that's the weed you want to control, have vegetation when it germinates, just prior to its germination, and leave it there. Do not graze it. Nimblewheel, I don't have a picture of it, I don't think, here, but now in Tennessee you can plant Johnson grass and it's legal. I checked with the regulatory several times, and the great thing about Johnson grass is it gets above that nimblewheel, and they're going to sustain. They're going to be, you're just going to learn to live with it. It's not like you're going to kill it. You just got to learn to work with it. And the animals with high density grazing will graze this nimblewheel. It's microstegium, somebody talked about. No, Muhlenbergii is it. Microstegium is another one. There's the ironweed, and that's just showing there where I believe that was goats back then. There's the perilla mint right there in the background. That's just showing the cattle and sheep and goats in the same field, and the sheep are laying down, ruminating, and the cattle are all around the hay, and the goats are down there too. That's just showing sharing a water tank. That's where some goats had stemmed the briars. And you just leave them out there, they'll just keep stemming it down. This is where I grazed some corn, and it was just drilled corn and just feed corn. You watch that, though. If you're doing that, you don't want to have heated, dried, where they harvest and dried it, because it might not germinate. But we just drilled the corn with a regular grass drill. And normal seeding rate is about 30,000 plants per acre, but this is 150,000. But it still costs, $6 an acre. So it's cheap. It's just a grass. We're grass fed, so in general, this was before we were grass fed, but you want to graze it before it makes an ear, if you're grass fed. Here's where we knocked it down, just put up a multi-strand polywire, I think 3 strands in this case. And this is where they're grazing and back graze. Now, I drew that black line in there. Again, like I said, they segregate. The sheep are back here in the back, and their heads are down. Goats are in the front, and their heads are up. This one's eating a spiny amaranth right there. Everything reaching through that corn, even spiny amaranth, is real vegetative. Anytime a plant reaches for light, it's more vegetative, has less structure, less cellulose, and it's going to be more digestible. They're going to eat it better. The cows are over in the corn. They're in that picture too, but they're behind me in the corn. And that's overgrazed. That's too high utilization. I want to leave, like Russ said, I'd love to leave 50% behind. Well, I was back grazing to water, and that was a screw up. You see the corn there in the background that we're headed toward. There's another water trough up there, so we'll start again. That's a finished steer that we had there on the corn. Another thing I watch for, I want the solar panel to be vibrant. I want it to be green. I don't want brown leaves shading green leaves. So kind of watch for that. I used to say that we shouldn't, in this part of the world, we shouldn't rest a field more than 90 days. I'm wrong on that. You could go longer. You can go 210 days in the winter, for sure. I've always said that. But even in the growing season, we can extend that if we started off with some vegetative plants. So that mushroom-looking haystack there, of course, they've wasted a lot of hay. They love to jump on it and get on it. They waste a lot of hay. But that mushroom there can kill goats. It does kill goats and sheep whenever it falls over. So we have a rack we usually use around those. This is another picture, and I drew those lines, and it shows again that segregation. The cattle on top of the hill, the sheep on the side slope, and the goats on the other. They just keep moving that around. They like to stay together, but they also, within their own groups, out there in the field. That's one paddock. And this is the top third grazing. That was a few years back, and we'll graze the top third, move on, and then eventually we'll go to take half, leave half. But if you really want the magic and see that miracle, something I haven't been good at, and I've only done it on a few fields, is leave a residual of 4 inches or higher through the winter, all the way through the winter. I've always taken it down to 2 inches. I really think we need to leave a lot more if you really want to make it happen. Might not be every field every year, but do try that on some fields. So, overview of forage management. Maintain that minimum grazing height. If you're not doing with the high density, short duration grazing, you may not need to do this, but I like to periodically take it lower. Take it on down. I'm not talking about too low. Take it down there to that 4 inches, and then let it have a recovery. And if you overdo it, give it a longer recovery to make up for the difference. I target grazing in the boot stage, just before it makes seed. So I think it's proven in haymaking. That's the best biomass and quality combination. So that's my target stage. Keep light to the desirable plants, shade out the undesirable. Nutrient management, as Russ pointed out, and I've got a few slides on that, but definitely consider nutrient management. And if you need to, apply a little fertilizer. Don't just think that your management alone is going to get you there if it's real low. If it's very low in phosphorus or the pH is off, go ahead and get it right and get rewarded for your management. I like long parallel fences and then divide them up with temporary wire. And then plan for that corral or that hub area. It's a very strategic point in the layout. Here's where I used to fence off the sheep mineral, because sheep, they have a name, at least in the industry, of not being tolerant of copper. Now we feed cattle mineral to everything. Now I'll still put some sheep mineral out there, but I don't exclude the cattle always. There's people feeding 7,200 part per million copper to sheep. And the reason being is we get higher parasite control, better parasite control. I don't know of anybody that's lost sheep to copper in my circles that are feeding high copper. So I think the industry was messed up on that. If you know different, speak up, because it's just not showing up in my circles as a problem. I love this handle. I used to buy bunches of those jumpers that you use with electric fence. This handle is wonderful. It's a Zammer handle, and you can hook it up hot or cold. I used to work, this was a rented farm, and I used to work about 200 sheep in that little setup there. It's just an old crib or stall, and set up a triangle. We run them around there and grab them and work them and turn them out in different locations. Two people can work, as long as you're in a 10 by 10 or 8 by 8 structure. You just keep grabbing them and working them and marking them, and you don't have to have fancy equipment. Now that's a swing slide gate. That's a pretty nice setup there, and that's where for bigger flocks where you could work them. That's where it's just an open-ended side-ale setup where the border collie keeps them pushed up. Just tell them to walk up, and they push them in towards you. Now that was just a shade structure, but you could work sheep and goats in there real easily. Predator control, 2 dogs minimum. I like the Akbosh. They're shorter-haired dog. The Pyrenees bark more than the other dogs, so if you're near neighbors, you might be concerned about the barking. That's an Anatolian Shepherd in the picture there. I like them. They're shorter-haired as well. But in addition to that 2 dogs minimum, 1 dog per 50, and that's counting the sheep, the lambs, or the kids. And I know Jan and Greg raise some guardian dogs, and we raise a few ourselves. But then I like 1 donkey per flock, not more than that, because they just buddy up. I like to get them as a weanling. That way they're looking for a companion. We feed them different ways. The guardian dogs can be quite a bit of work. And if you have a hit on an animal or a dead lamb or goat, suspect your guardian dog first. They're not all work out. In fact, usually about 50% of them work out. There's better strains than others, but they don't all work out. Yeah, so the potential is really unlimited. Turning a multiflora rose into fertilizer with a goat. I think the goat manure, I saw a bigger response with the goat manure than anything I added. So that whole cycling of nutrients is important, especially that we're getting pelletized manure instead of a big plop of manure with cattle. So there's big benefits there. The weed control, the animal flow is good with sheep because they're so flock oriented. Movement draws movement, even with cattle. If they're moving, then here the others are drawn to it. You got a longer grazing season where that's more of a high density, short duration thing. Manage that grazing height again, and then we'll have less droughts and all, less flooding if we manage our height. And then the improved water infiltration and greater profits. So now I'm going to move into the land management, and we'll move right on through this. You know, in the vegetation management, we're always saying, well, you could get by with this, you could get by with that. But really, to get the very best management, that's what these guys before me have been really talking about. Manage that height. Don't take it down to 2 inches in the winter. If you want it to really perform, then you need to keep that grazing height up. Keep residue on the ground. Balance the fertility. Just go by the Land Grant University not recommendations, but their test. You don't need to apply these fertilizers every year. Just get it up to the medium level, and with good grazing management, we can keep it there. Now on the pH and the lime, you're not going to need to lime it near as frequent. You know, normally people say once in 5 years. It's going to be more like 7 or 10 years before you might need to lime. Generally, the university recommendations are about 6 to 6.2, 6.5, right in there for pH. I like a pH of 6.9. The soil health is better if it's up a little higher, so I target a higher pH. Recovery time, we want that 21 to 210 day recovery time. My average is 45 days, but like Alan said, we do not want that to lock in on a certain thing. And I've covered most of the rest of these. Lots of plant material out there that we could plant, but in general, manage what you have. And the diversity will come with good management. One herd, I can't say enough about it, but there is times we want to separate. Like right now, I'm considering separating my finishers and rut graze them first, and then the rest of the herds, flock and herd, would follow. That's my go-to layout on farms is long parallel fields, and then water in every other fence line, and then divide them up in paddocks with the yellow lines there just to divide it up. And they all lead toward a corral ultimately. This is looking at my land there on the right, and that's Perella mint, that brown. So it wasn't even the best management there, but that brown standing forb there is Perella mint where it was there in the summer. That means I didn't have enough height in the spring when it germinated. But the land on the left was managed more traditionally, and so it's a comparison of how you can manage with management, bring it around. Here's another piece of property that they just let me graze because it wasn't producing hay anymore. When you hay it, it's extractive management. You're removing phosphorus, and the fertility just goes down, 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 and the plant community responds, and we've brought this place back now. In fact, this is that same land, and I own where the sheep are there. It's not fenced, but the sheep are selectively grazing where the nutrition is better in the grass. I did a clipping on this, and I was producing twice as much forage as the other land, but that's not the whole story. Really, the utilization was half over there too, so that's 4 times more production where I've improved the fertility. There's feeding some hay and unrolling hay and what was residual. Some numbers on manure is per cow per day. It's 85 per year. Sorry, for a year they'll drop this much in nutrient NP and K. 85, 57, 190. That's a lot of nutrients. And if they land in the field, that's a value. If they land in the shade, it's possible environmental hazard. And I did the numbers. And if we're running 100 head and they're on an acre for 5 days, not consecutive days, just 5 days at, we can fertilize that land as what's needs. And I hadn't fertilized in going on 16 or more years, and just due to the high density, short duration grazing and the flood, the nutrients are all good, and it's greener than the neighbors, and it doesn't have the drought issues. One thing with those hay feeding pads, they're pushed quite a bit, and there is a place for those, but it's only when it's really wet and you're overgrazed in other areas and all. The urine has most of the nitrogen and the phosphorus in it. We're not capturing that with a feed pad. So you're only getting the potash with the manure. Did I get that right? No, phosphorus in the manure and N and K in the urine is the difference. All right, so keep them moving. Don't allow them to get that second bite. Watch for rumen fill. That's on the left side. We want it to be flat or bulging. Grazing the woods. A lot of people, especially with goats, they want to graze the woods. Well, you'll get about one grazing in 30 years. Because if it's not got light, you're not going to get regrowth. That's my place, and that's not good. Here's where we're running cattle, all kinds of different animals together there, and the dogs seem to, I guess we conditioned them where they just said, come on, we're just having a big party here. I don't know how much they would fight coyotes off because we already have a big party going, so. And that's after. That's some, what's it called? It's prairie brome grass from New Zealand. Rescue grass. And it's very adapted to shade areas and high nutrient. And there's some ryegrass in there too. This is a shade area in one area that it's in a riparian area. I don't like using that, but I come back and overseed some vegetation there. I don't know who left that beer bottle on that post there. There's the hogs, running them with 2 wires. Doesn't take much to hold a hog in once you train them to electric. They were kind of nervous that day. And I like the overhead wires. They don't look quite as attractive as underground, but I like that. And we use water corrals we haul off about 3 cows, 3 sheep, sometimes 3 pigs a month, and so we have to have a lot of gathering spots, and it's nice to have that around some of the water troughs. There's a quick coupler. I'm running out of time. I like the Rubbermaid trough with sheep and goats. With cattle, I like a bigger tank, even a 300-gallon. They don't turn them off over as easy. I won't tell the story there. Let's see. We feed some apple cider vinegar, more just as a health benefit. There they are doing a taste testing. For fly control, mainly use garlic. For fly control, feed 1 pound per 50 pounds of mineral. I'm trying some cinnamon and oregano, but most of the results are coming from the garlic. That's a walk-through fly trap I have, and it works real well. I just need to increase the mobility of that structure, put some wheels on it. But it's a proven thing to keep them at economic threshold, the flies. So just do it. Have a goal in mind and stick to it, and consider that when you're doing your management. We've got the pasture walk coming up, and it's October 14th. You can go to my website, it's gregbrann.com, and you'll see the flyer and registration on there. Usually have somewhere a little less than 200 people there. I don't know how many we'll have this year, but it's a gathering of grazers and sharing ideas, and it's just a conversation. All right, well, any time for a question? Any questions on any of it? I'm not hearing the mic. I don't hear well, so.
I don't either. In your natural fly control, you're talking, you got your Senegar mineral there.
Yeah, I'm not.
That's $30 a bag.
I fed some Senegar, and it wasn't as potent as what me just mixing my own.
Well, when you say regular mineral, what do you mean by that?
Well, whatever mineral you're feeding.
Purina, just
Purina,
all season.
Southern States Co-op, whatever mineral it is, just add a pound of garlic. And I get the garlic from webrestaurantstore.com, whatever source, it's garlic powder. It does a good job. Sometimes I increase it this time of year. Sometimes flies are at their worst, or August, late August, and I'll increase it just a little bit. But in general, there's still some flies. It's like it's not no flies.
The second question, the last one, is if you have only a cow-calf operation and you have some buttercup and you have some pigweed and you have those, if you wanted to introduce a weed control second critter, would it be a sheep or a goat, and how many? I don't want to get in the sheep business, and I don't want to get in the goat
I would do
business,
the sheep for the plants you mentioned, and they're easier to manage too. And it'd be one per cow would be the highest rate I'd go, unless you want to become a shepherd.
Can you commingle them with the cattle if you just did 2 or 3?
Yeah, they just run with
Okay.
You could just let them have free reign. And now the cattle don't like to follow the sheep, but if you're stocked low enough, it's okay to have some of that. They'll seek out those forbs. Just be observant and make sure that they're not taking away cattle feed. Realize why they're there.
On your fly trap that you built, the walk-through fly trap,
That's on the it's on website, not on my website, but it's online, and it's Missouri has the design for it. It's a 1950s technology, and it's the economic threshold on flies is 200 flies per animal, which is about like that. And so, it's got the how to build it. Cost me about $500 in materials to build it. It's more for a dairy than anything else because they're walking down an alley, but it works with cattle if you can move it around and go through the water.
Okay.
Got one over here.
Sounds like you have a lot of wisdom on what eats what weed and what weed does what. There's a lot of us here that don't know that without
Don't know
trial
the
and
weeds.
error. Is there any resources, books, et cetera, that would tell us
Yeah,
that?
I'm not real good at remembering the names of some of these. You help me out, Alan. Weeds of the South is a good book, but the one that Ozzie Obey did, what's the name of that book? It's Ozzie Obey, and I think she's from Puerto Rico or something, but we can get you the name of that book. It's good at telling you what those plants are and how they could be managed. It's not just weeds on that book. You have
Weeds and what they tell us.
Weeds and what they tell us.
The weeds, guardians of the soil.
Weeds, guardians of the soil, Alan says. I'm not familiar with those two so much, but yeah. Weeds in general are higher quality than the grass. There's some weeds that they don't eat. And like the perilla mint, we don't want them eating a lot of that. Stickweed is another one that I don't like. It's a wing stem plant. We can make them eat it. If you're making your animals do a job, a lot of times you're playing with fire. Greg.
Yeah, Greg, so if you took over management of a farm here in Tennessee, and it's pretty much 100% broom sedge, what's your first steps at turning that thing around?
Yeah, so y'all heard the question. Turning around broom sedge, I would soil test, and I know that you get tired of hearing that. it's not always lime. It's not always pH. It could be phosphorus, potash, it could be lime. And another technique that you can use is graze it real hard when it's vegetative in May. When it's just coming out, it's vegetative. And if you were to put if it's needed phosphorus and you put DAP down, there's some nitrogen, it's going to be even more palatable. So you can graze it out. We've grazed it out before with high density, short duration grazing. You might want to pug it. You might want to, that's a tool for weed control, is get in there when it's wet. If you don't like that plant, let it pug up, let it turn to mud. And you may want to throw some seed out there. You may want to work with it and give it a long recovery and see what comes up. Ragweed's a disturbance plant. It just comes up where there's disturbance. That's a good thing for sheep because they love it. Goats love it too. Lamb's quarter, another one that is high quality. They'll come in those disturbance situations. You got some other ideas?
Well, I was going to say, you could unroll hay on it, in the wintertime.
What?
You could unroll hay on it in the wintertime.
Yeah, that's a great one for.
I think one of the biggest mistakes I look back on, of course, when I was first starting out, you don't have a lot of extra money to throw around, but on some of these land leases, we had leases where we had them like a year at a time. So you don't want to make a big investment in something you're not going to have. But ended up, one of our farms we had for 19 years, 1 year at a time.
Right.
I'm like, gosh darn it, right at the very start, if I'd went in and put down a little bit of phosphorus and lime, because see, you only have it for so long. You might as well, I like what you said, get it up. You don't have to give it to it every year, but get that production up.
Get it at least out of the low category.
Yes, because you can't make a living on broom sedge.
No. My vet says he checks the mouth of animals on broom sedge because they can be serrated, cut, because it's sharp. But if it's vegetative, it's not as bad. Once you start seeing it turn brown, it's not good at all. It's kind of beyond. Yeah, he's asking if we should clip it once it turns brown. Really, it's beyond the stage, and it's, and looking at the hole, it's a windbreak, for calves and stuff to lay down in. So I don't know that you're going to get much out of it by clipping in the fall. Oh, okay.
Just wondering your opinion on the copper toxicity in sheep, the multiple species, the multiple exposure, and as one mineral moves another, as your more varied species and everything would probably balance that out to where the toxicity would be less.
You're talking about varied plant species?
Not just that, but just exposure to the different mineral through the plant species.
When it comes to parts per million, I just don't know. And I don't know that anybody else does. I like what Russ was doing with the vegetation, the forage test, and then matching up the mineral. Everybody's got a different mineral idea. Now, I like high selenium and high copper and higher phosphorus. But beyond that, I don't know.
Just a little exposure we've had in conventional farming, how one moves another. You can really move things around with other minerals, and so if copper's the only thing there, probably really likely to be toxic, where something else might push copper aside.
They need selectivity. Yeah, iron ties up copper, sulfur ties up copper.
If you got a limited budget, right, and I guess what I'm hearing from some research I've done too is like living roots. It's better for the soils, building the soil health. If you get the soil healthy, then you don't need to put fertilizers and this, that, and the other and stuff on there, right?
Yeah.
So if you got a limited budget and you got a really poor farm, do you spend your money on fertilizers, or do you spend your money on grass seed or compost? I mean, I can't do all of them.
Right.
What would be, or rolling out hay, what would be your best bang for your buck to improve the soil so that you don't need to do it again?
Right.
So it starts growing and doing whatever.
my knowledge is lime is adjust the pH first, or get the calcium right, and then, like we mentioned earlier, get it at least in the low medium category. Get it out of the low as far as phosphorus and potash. Nitrogen, in the regenerative ag, nitrogen's not, we don't apply much nitrogen, almost never, because legumes can provide that. And we want a more balanced system. And then you can plant things that are adapted, like low fertility, the natives, or the hairy vetch, or the annual espadiza. Those are all adapted to millets, somewhat adapted to low fertility. I'm sure I'm missing some, but yeah.
Two questions, really. One, I've had pretty poor luck putting down slack lime, and of course I dropped the clutch out of my tractor pulling a dump truck out that got stuck, and so I kind of gave up on that, and I've had a lot better luck with just putting bag lime out in the small spreader, and it's bioactive a lot sooner, and I can get by with less than half the quantity. Have you found that to be true?
What kind of lime?
I'm just using normal dolomitic crushed limestone in bag, 40-pound bag, but I'll put out 1,000 bags.
Yeah. Is it pelletized lime?
It's pelletized.
It's pretty expensive.
But I subtract the cost of the hauling and the damage to my pastures, and I'm doing it myself, and I come out just about the same.
Right. Yeah.
It's bioactive sooner.
Yeah. It's slow reacting, so I think if you can put it on, if you're putting it on yourself, then put it on in low doses. But if you're paying to have it on, and I just go ahead and get it on personally, but I would preferably put it on at 500 to 1,000 pounds a year for several years if I needed to. Again, my target on pH is 6.9. It makes things available, and there's this whole thought out there that lime's not even important, it's more the calcium, but lime's the cheapest form of calcium. While we're on lime, you don't want too much magnesium. If you're high in magnesium, you don't want any more magnesium because it's blocking the calcium somewhat, and then the potash, it's just a bad ratio and all. So dolomitic lime's got a good name, but it's not always what's needed.
My other question was, so I'm trying to get away from a sacrifice pasture in the winter, and because that's hard on the animals' feet, and then I've got to come back and renovate that whole pasture and then hold off it for a good bit of time, and then I'll get just a ton of pug-related weeds. But if I'm trying to keep a 4-inch residual, and I'm going to continue to move my animals through the winter, they're going to graze everything down short, even as I'm supplementing with hay.
Yeah.
Just tough luck.
You're going to have go to a sacrifice lot or field that maybe has bad plants on it. You want to change the plant community. If you don't have enough grass, you got to be somewhere. So just think about which fields you want to improve. And as Alan was pointing out, different years you might improve different fields. You might do some reseeding. And if you're in an area that grows Bermuda, the sacrifice area would best be in Bermuda.
Do you recommend aeration before liming?
No, most everybody agrees on that soil health minded not to do any aeration, that the soil life will do the aeration. And then if you really want to improve aeration, living roots are the answer. So just raise your residual height and get more plants. And again, Alan pointed out those weeds are trying to correct the pH and the internal drainage and all. So now, if you raise the height, you'll get less runoff and more infiltration.
I've got one more right up here.
What kind of hay ring are you using on sheep?
What kind of hay ring?
Yes.
We're using one from Sidell, but in general, the sheep aren't bad. like goats. But we use the sliding one where they push it in. It slides in as you eat the round roll. Some people don't like round rolls for small ruminants, but they sure are easier than square bales. So what I'll do with square bales, though, I'll buy some high-quality square bales, and here's the fence. I've noticed on my place there's more broom sedge, and it's not eating as much because they don't walk right. They won't get within 2 or 3 feet, 2 feet of the fence. So there's no manure drop in there. That's why that broom sedge is there, is it's not getting the defecation import nutrient. So I'll feed right on that fence, and it's clean because they haven't defecated there. And I can flake out that square bale, and I can feed 100 cows just like 5 square bales. And they all get a bite of that good quality hay.
All right, thank you, Greg. Appreciate that.